The lunchbox slipped from Eliza's hands and hit the cold concrete, but she didn't pick it up. Her eyes stayed locked on the man curled into himself in the dark corner beneath the bridge, trembling, his lips moving around whispers that only the night seemed to hear. "Sir," Eliza breathed, nudging the box closer with the toe of her worn old shoe. "You need to eat." Behind her, traffic rushed along the town's main road in Millbrook, a steady stream of impatience and noise. A few pedestrians passed by, glanced over, then shook their heads. "That shelter girl's feeding that crazy man again," a woman murmured. "Must be something wrong with her head, too." Eliza ignored them. She always did. Every morning, while the town was still buried in darkness, the 28-year-old girl set aside half her lunch, sometimes the only meal she'd have all day, and carried it to the man Millbrook called Crazy Will. He lived under the abandoned railroad bridge, wrapped in clothes that were torn and filthy now. Though once, perhaps, they'd been very expensive. Now coated in dust and the world's contempt, no one knew where he'd come from. 3 years earlier, he'd appeared like a ghost, speaking in broken, senseless fragments, smiling at things no one else could see, sometimes screaming in the middle of the night. People said he was haunted. Mothers pulled their children away whenever he drifted down the street. Teenagers threw bottles at him for fun. But Eliza saw something else. She saw his hands shake when hunger tightened its grip. She saw the long scar across his throat, as if someone had once tried to cut his life away. She saw the gold ring on his finger, engraved with a mysterious letter B, and she saw the deep, endless sadness hidden behind those wild eyes. She saw a human being. "Someone's here," Eliza said softly, lowering herself to the ground a few steps away. "I brought you food. It's still warm." The man looked up. For an instant, his eyes lit with something sharp and clear. Not the gaze of a madman, but the gaze of someone straining to remember something that mattered more than breath. Then that light went out, and he sank back into his delirium. Eliza was unaware that deep within the bustling heart of Chicago, a massive reward was already being pledged to find the man she was currently protecting. She didn't know that the ragged figure in front of her had once been the most powerful kingpin in the Midwest, and she certainly didn't know that her life was about to change forever. If you want to know what happens next, please tap the heart and share this video right now. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss stories like this that reach straight into the heart. Eliza stepped into the second chance shelter just as the sun was breaking over the horizon, her old shoes still damp with dew from the path that led to the space beneath the bridge. She tried to look normal, as if she hadn't just given up half her lunch to a man the whole town called crazy. Martha Chen stood at the front desk, the sharp eyes of a 58-year-old woman sweeping Eliza from head to toe. "Have you eaten breakfast?" Martha asked, her voice strict, but threaded with worry. Eliza nodded and forced a small, uneasy smile. "Yes, ma'am. I ate before I left." It was a lie. She knew it. Martha knew it too. But neither of them said anything more. Lucy appeared from the staff break room, brown hair pulled into a high ponytail, her eyes anxious the moment she spotted Eliza. She tugged her friend into a quiet corner of the empty hallway, her whisper low but edged with anger. "You skipped eating again so you could bring food to that old man, didn't you?" "Eliza, you're destroying yourself." Eliza opened her mouth to argue, but Lucy had already grabbed her wrist and pushed her sleeve up. Under the fluorescent light, the old scar showed itself, pale ridges crossing her skin like a reminder of the darkest moment of her life. Lucy went silent, her eyes filling. Eliza pulled her arm back, yanked her sleeve down, and lowered her gaze to avoid her friends. She stepped into the bathroom, shut the door, and stood before the mirror. The 28-year-old woman staring back at her had hollow eyes from too little sleep, sharp cheekbones from too little food, and scars no layer of clothing could hide forever. Eliza closed her eyes, and memory crashed over her like a violent wave. She remembered her mother, a gentle woman with long black hair and the scent of lavender clinging to her clothes. Her mother died when Eliza was only 7, cancer taking her in just 6 months. A stepfather arrived 2 years later, a polished businessman with a mouth full of promises. But behind closed doors, he was a demon. The first bottle of liquor, the first slap, then beatings that stretched across 10 years. Eliza was hit for cooking rice the wrong way, locked in a closet for 2 days because she dared to cry, starved because she looked at him the wrong way. No one knew. No one asked. She was the invisible child in a beautiful house, bruises hidden under long sleeves and a fake smile carried into school. At 17, on her most desperate night, Eliza reached a breaking point. The darkness within became too heavy for her to carry. Not because she wanted to die, but because she wanted to feel something other than emptiness. The scar on her wrist was the silent echo of that cry for help. The scar on her wrist was the silent echo of that cry for help. At 18, she finally ran with no money, no family, and nowhere to go. 2 years on the streets of Chicago taught her the world could be even crueler than her stepfather. She slept beneath bridges, ate leftovers from trash bins, and learned how to become invisible in order to survive. Then Martha found her. One winter night when Eliza was 20, she lay curled behind the dumpster of a restaurant, nearly dead from hunger and cold. Martha, a stranger with stern eyes but warm hands, carried her back to the shelter, fed her, gave her a bed, gave her a reason to keep living. Eliza opened her eyes and studied the woman in the mirror again. The scar was still there. The past was still there. She wondered, as she had wondered 1,000 times, why she was still alive, whether she deserved to be. Then she thought of the old man under the bridge, his eyes wild but holding a bottomless sorrow, his hands trembling as he took the food box. He had been abandoned too. He was invisible to the world too. At least, Eliza told herself, she could help one person not have to endure loneliness the way she once had. She wiped her eyes, drew a deep breath, and stepped out of the bathroom. Martha was waiting outside, holding out a cup of hot coffee. "Go do your work, sweetheart," she said softly. Eliza took it and managed a smile. She didn't know that the past she'd tried to bury for years was about to come back, and this time, it wouldn't come alone. That afternoon, after her shift at the shelter, Eliza stopped by the little market in Millbrook to buy some food. She chose the cheapest things: a loaf of bread, a few eggs, a can of soup, just enough to split into 2 portions, one for herself and one for the old man beneath the bridge. As she stood in line to pay, the eyes around her turned in her direction as if she were carrying a disease. 2 women nearby whispered loudly enough for her to hear. "That shelter girl? I heard she's hanging around with the crazy guy under the bridge." "That's right, bringing him food every day. Something's wrong with her head." Eliza lowered her gaze and pretended she couldn't hear. She'd been used to contempt for a long time. She had barely stepped outside the market when the noise from the town square drew her attention. A crowd had gathered around the fountain, where Mayor Thomas Keller stood beside a heavyset man in an expensive suit. Eliza recognized him at once as Raymond Castillo, owner of the biggest restaurant in town, one of the richest and most powerful men in Millbrook. She meant to slip past unnoticed, but what Raymond was saying made her feet feel nailed to the ground. 20 years ago, Raymond roared, his voice thick with hatred. "A homeless bastard robbed me right on this road. My wife, Linda, tried to stop him. He shoved her, and she fell, hit her head on the sidewalk." He paused, jaw clenched hard. 3 months later, she died. A brain hemorrhage, because of a piece of trash with nothing to lose. The crowd fell silent, and a few people nodded with sympathy. Raymond turned to Mayor Keller, his eyes flashing with a cold light. "I won't allow that kind of person to exist in our town. Not ever again." Mayor Keller, a thin man with a face sharp as a blade, and the darting eyes of someone always calculating, stepped forward. He lifted a hand to calm the crowd, his voice echoing through the handheld microphone. "Everyone, rest assured, I've heard your concerns. The area beneath the railroad bridge has become a refuge for drifters, an eyesore and a potential danger to our town." He paused, sweeping his gaze around as if savoring the attention. "Therefore, I declare that within the next 2 weeks, we'll carry out a cleanup campaign to clear that entire area, for the security and peace of Millbrook." The crowd applauded. Raymond Castillo smiled in triumph, pulled out his wallet, and announced he'd fund the entire cost of the campaign. Eliza stood frozen amid the cheering, her heart squeezed tight in her chest. 2 weeks. They would drive him out in 2 weeks. Or worse. Then Raymond's gaze cut through the crowd and landed on Eliza. He recognized her, his eyes narrowing with malice. He walked over, and the people parted automatically to make way for a powerful man. "Shelter girl," Raymond said, his voice hissing like a snake. "I hear you're feeding the crazy guy under the bridge, bringing him food every day like he's some stray dog." Eliza lifted her head, forcing her voice not to shake. "He's a human being. He's never hurt anyone." Raymond gave a sharp, contemptuous laugh and stepped closer, his shadow spilling over her as if it wanted to swallow her whole. "Not yet, But people like that will bite the hand that feeds them someday. Be careful, little girl. I'm watching you. He turned away, leaving Eliza standing alone under the crowd's prying stares. She clenched the bag of groceries in her hand, fighting the tremble in her fingers. 14 days. She had only 14 days to find a way to save a man the whole world wanted to throw away. She had no money, no power, no one on her side. But she had something Raymond Castillo and Mayor Keller would never understand. She knew what it felt like to be treated like trash, to be chased off like a stray dog, to have the world turn its back, and she swore she wouldn't let that happen to anyone again, not to him. Eliza turned and walked away, leaving the whispers behind her. Little did she know, inside a gleaming penthouse, high above the city streets, the wheels of fate were starting to turn in her direction. A man was counting the days, the hours, searching for the very person she was trying to protect, and their fates were slowly twisting together, thread by thread, like strands of destiny. More than 200 miles north of Millbrook, in a penthouse atop the tallest building in Chicago, Adrian Blackwood stood in silence before a massive wall of glass, looking down over the city. The nightlights glittered all the way to the horizon, but his eyes saw nothing except darkness. On the oak table behind him, dozens of photographs of a salt and pepper-haired man were laid out in neat rows beside a map of the United States, crowded with red circles marking every place they had searched. 3 years, 1,095 days, and still nothing. A soft knock sounded at the door, and then Frank Moretti stepped in, a 45-year-old man with graying hair and loyal eyes who had followed Adrian since Adrian was a hot-headed teenager. "Boss," Frank said, his voice low and worn out. "The Wisconsin team just reported. Nothing." Adrian didn't turn around. He only gave a small nod. He'd heard that line too many times. Nothing, nothing, nothing. 3 years. A $5 million reward. Hundreds of leads from all over the country. And every single one of them had ended in a dead end. "It's been 3 years, Frank," Adrian said, his voice rough. 3 years I've been looking for my father. And still nothing. He closed his eyes, and the memory of that night slammed into him again like a nightmare that never ended. 3 years earlier, William Blackwood's 60th birthday party, an evening that should have been full of laughter and joy. Adrian had come home late because of a business meeting that ran on and on. He had called his father and promised he'd be back before 9 o'clock, but he didn't make it. When he arrived, the mansion was silent in the dark. His father's car sat parked on a street 3 blocks away, the door hanging open, blood on the driver's seat, but no body. A traitor inside the organization had poisoned his father with an Eastern European nerve agent, a toxin that could destroy the mind, wipe memory clean, and turn a man into a raving madman. They threw him out on the street like trash, convinced he'd be dead within days. Adrian found the traitor and dealt with him in the way only the Blackwood family knew, but the man died without revealing where Adrian's father was. That secret was buried with him under 10 feet of concrete. Adrian opened his eyes and clenched his fists until his knuckles went white. He should have been there. He should have protected his father. If he hadn't been greedy, chasing that damned meeting, if he'd come home on time like he promised, everything would have been different. His father wouldn't have vanished. His father wouldn't have spent 3 years out there alone, not knowing who he was, not knowing his son was searching for him every second of every day. That guilt sat on Adrian's chest every night, stealing his sleep, stealing his breath. Frank stepped closer, his tone gentle but steady. "Boss, I still believe the old man is alive." Adrian turned to look at his loyal right hand, his eyes bloodshot from too many sleepless nights. "How can you be sure? It's been 3 years, Frank. Not a single trace, not a single piece of news. Maybe my father has." "No," Frank cut in, his voice firm. "Mr. William is the strongest man I've ever known. He survived the gang wars of the 80s. Survived 3 assassination attempts. He won't die that easily. I believe he's out there, somewhere, waiting for us to find him." Adrian was quiet for a long time. Then he walked to the desk and picked up a photograph of his father. In the picture, William Blackwood was smiling, his eyes bright, a gold ring on his finger engraved with the letter B, a ring he had never taken off since the day his wife gave it to him. Adrian touched the image of the ring, his voice a whisper that sounded like a prayer. "I'll find you, Dad. Even if I have to turn the whole country upside down. Even if it takes my entire life." He didn't know that just a little more than 200 miles away, in a small town called Millbrook, a thin brown-haired girl was sitting beside his father, feeding him porridge 1 spoonful at a time. and treating him like a human being when the rest of the world had forgotten who he was. The next morning, before the sky had fully brightened, Eliza was already beneath the railroad bridge with a cup of warm water and a clean cloth. She found William sitting motionless in his usual corner, his back against the cold concrete wall, his eyes fixed on an empty nowhere. Today he seemed quieter than usual. No muttering of nonsense, no shouting at the sky the way he had on nights before. Eliza sat down a few steps away, dipped the cloth into the warm water, and slowly moved closer. "Let me wipe your face," she said gently, her voice the way someone might speak to a frightened child. And something strange happened. For the first time in all the months she'd been caring for him, William didn't flinch or pull away. He stayed still and let her wipe the grime from his hollow face, his eyes softening little by little, as if something inside him were trying to wake up. When Eliza reached his neck, she stopped, her breath catching in her chest. A long scar ran across his throat, from beneath his left ear down toward his collarbone, pale and old, but unmistakably a wound made by a knife, as if someone had once tried to cut his throat. Eliza swallowed hard, forcing herself to stay calm, and continued downward to his hands. And there she noticed another unsettling detail. These hands, though dirty and gaunt, weren't calloused the way a laborer's hands would be, or the hands of someone who'd lived on the street for years. The skin was soft. The fingers were long and slender. His nails, though grimy, had been cut neatly. These were the hands of someone who had once lived in comfort, someone used to being served, not the hands of a drifter. Then Eliza's gaze stopped on the ring, the gold ring on the fourth finger of his left hand, something she'd seen since the first day but had never studied closely. She leaned in, and her heart began to pound when she saw the engraving. A capital B, delicate and elegant, the kind of lettering you only see on expensive jewelry. That ring was worth a fortune, and yet he'd worn it through 3 years on the street, without anyone stealing it, as if it were the only thing he still had left from the life he used to be. Suddenly, William's hand closed around Eliza's wrist. She startled, but she didn't pull free in time. His eyes, for the first time since she'd met him, lit with something entirely different from his usual madness. It was the look of a man trying to hold on to reality, trying to push through the fog in his mind and reach the world outside. "Adrian," he whispered, his voice rough but frighteningly clear. "Adrian, my son, find your father." Eliza held her breath, not daring to move. "Who is Adrian?" she asked softly. "Do you have a son?" William's grip tightened, his eyes shining with tears. "Don't trust. They poisoned. Empire. Blackwood." And then the light in his eyes went out, like a candle snuffed by the wind. He released her wrist, his head falling forward as he sank back into his familiar delirium, his mouth forming meaningless sounds once again. Eliza stayed where she was, her heart hammering. Adrian, a son, an empire, Blackwood. The scattered pieces spun through her mind like a storm. He had a family. He had a son named Adrian. Then why hadn't his son found him? Why had he lived like this for 3 years without anyone coming to bring him home? She looked at the ring with the letter B, looked at the scar on his throat, looked at the hands without calluses, and a bitter thought took hold. Maybe they'd abandoned him. Maybe his family had thrown him away the way her stepfather had thrown her away. Maybe in this world, blood meant nothing the moment someone became useless. But then Eliza shook her head, pushing the darkness back. Whoever he was, wherever his family might be, whether they had abandoned him or not, it didn't matter. What mattered was that he was here, alone, hungry, and lost. And she wouldn't leave him. She rose to her feet, looked down at the man curled beneath the bridge, and made a quiet promise to herself. She would find out who he was. She would uncover the truth. But no matter what that truth turned out to be, she would protect him, because he deserved to be treated like a human being. That night, the storm hit Millbrook without warning. Rain came down as if the sky were being poured out, wind shrieking in violent gusts that tore through the trees along the streets, thunder and lightning crashing and ripping open the pitch-black sky. Eliza lay on her bed in her small apartment, eyes wide, staring at the ceiling. She couldn't sleep, not because of the thunder, but because the image of the old man curled beneath the bridge wouldn't stop haunting her. The underside of that bridge had a roof, but it wasn't enough to block the wind. The rain would blow in, soak through his thin, ragged clothes. In this cold, with an elderly body already worn down, he could die before morning. Eliza sat straight up, threw on her old raincoat, and ran outside. She crossed the empty streets, rain lashing her face like a whip, icy wind cutting into her skin. When she reached the bridge, her heart felt like it cracked in two. William lay curled in the corner, shaking uncontrollably, his lips blue, his forehead burning as if on fire. He had a high fever in the middle of a night storm. She dropped to her knees, pressed a hand to his forehead, and her tears blended with the rain. "Sir, I have to take you somewhere. You can't stay here." She hauled him up, slipped his arm over her shoulder, and started walking through the downpour. William was heavier than she expected, his body sagging into hers like someone who had no strength left. Every step was a battle, but Eliza didn't stop. She had only one place to go, her apartment. But halfway there, another fear began to seep into her mind, the kind of fear she thought she'd buried long ago. She was about to bring a strange man home, alone. In the night, the flashback slammed into her without warning, her bedroom door flying open in the middle of the night. The tall shadow of her stepfather filling the doorway, the stench of liquor on his breath, his unsteady steps coming toward her, the sound of a 13-year-old girl crying and begging, the slap, the punch, her screaming that no one heard. Eliza stopped in the street, trembling all over, not only from the cold. She wanted to leave William right there, go back to her apartment, lock the door, and hide in a corner the way she had for 10 years. But then she looked down at the man leaning on her shoulder. This old man wasn't her stepfather. He was weak, in pain, barely able to defend himself, let alone hurt anyone. He needed her, and she had sworn she wouldn't abandon him. Eliza drew a deep breath, forced the fear down to the bottom of her heart, and kept walking. They turned into a dark alley as a shortcut, and that was when disaster struck. A shadow stepped out to block their path, the stink of alcohol and cigarettes punching into Eliza's nose. The drunk was big, his face flushed red, his eyes dull and glassy, laughing when he saw a young woman helping an old man through the rain. "Hey, sweetheart, where are you going out so late?" he slurred, moving closer. "All alone? Or you need a guy to walk you home?" Eliza backed up, pulling William with her, her voice shaking. "Please move aside. We just want to pass." But the drunk didn't listen. He grabbed Eliza's arm and yanked her toward him, his foul breath washing over her face. "Don't play hard to get, little girl. I like you." Eliza froze. Her body went rigid, her mind dropping into darkness. She was 13 again, trapped in a room with her stepfather. She couldn't scream. She couldn't run. She couldn't do anything except stand there, shaking, waiting for the worst to happen. But the worst didn't come. In that instant, William suddenly straightened. The body that had been limp like someone dying suddenly twitched, driven by a sharp, subconscious surge of survival instinct. In 3 seconds, it was over. He turned, his arm stopping the drunk's grip, and then his elbow slammed into the man's throat with terrifying precision. The drunk hit the ground and went unconscious without even managing a sound. It wasn't brute force, but the buried muscle memory of a professional. His mind was in a fog, but his body still remembered how to neutralize a threat with cold, lethal efficiency. William turned to Eliza, and for a brief moment his eyes were bright. No wildness, no haze, only clarity and protection. "No one," he said, his voice rough but every word unmistakably clear, "is allowed to hurt you." Then his eyes clouded again, his body sagging, the fever dragging him back into delirium. Eliza stood in the rain, frozen, staring at the drunk lying motionless on the ground, staring at William collapsing in her arms. Her heart hammered as if it would burst through her ribs. This man, the one the whole town called crazy, had just dropped someone twice his size in 3 seconds, with a skill she'd only ever seen in action movies. Who was he? What was his past? Why would someone with that kind of ability live like a beggar under a bridge? Eliza had no answers. She only knew one thing. This man was not ordinary, and she had just stepped deeper into a secret she might never have been meant to touch. Eliza didn't know how she managed to get William back to her apartment. She only remembered the rain, the wind, and the weight of him pressing down on her shoulder for what felt like an endless distance. When the apartment door finally closed behind them, she eased him onto the old sofa, then sank onto the floor, gasping for air. Her clothes were soaked through, her body trembling with cold. But she didn't have time to worry about herself. William was burning with fever, his body shuddering in waves, sweat beading and streaming across his forehead even though he'd been drenched in rain for more than an hour. Eliza rushed into the bathroom, grabbed clean towels, a basin of warm water, and began the work she knew too well from the shelter, caring for people who had no one left to care for them. She wiped him down, changed his wet, ragged clothes into one of her own oversized t-shirts and an old pair of sleep pants, pulled a thick blanket over him, then mixed fever medicine and coaxed him to drink it. William swallowed in a daze, eyes squeezed shut, lips moving around words that didn't quite form. Eliza stayed beside him all night, replacing the cool cloth on his forehead every 15 minutes, listening to his heavy breathing and praying the fever would break. She didn't sleep. She didn't dare. Not because she was afraid of him, but because she was afraid he wouldn't survive the night if she let her guard down for even a second. Near 3 in the morning, William began to talk in his sleep. At first, it was only meaningless sounds, low moans of pain, but then the words grew clearer, as if his mind were fighting to push through the fog that wrapped around it. "Blackwood," he whispered, his voice rough. "The Blackwood Empire. They betrayed. Adrian, you have to be strong. Don't trust anyone." Eliza leaned closer, her heart pounding. Blackwood, Adrian, an empire. The words he'd spoken in that brief moment of clarity the day before. The words she'd held onto but hadn't had time to chase down. Now they surfaced again, like a cry for help rising from the deepest part of a soul lost inside its own memories. When dawn finally began to lighten the sky, William's fever at last came down. He lay still, breathing evenly, the violent flush fading from his face. Eliza let out a shaky breath of relief, but her mind couldn't rest. Questions spun through her like a storm. What was Blackwood? What empire? Who was Adrian? Why had he said they betrayed him? She stood, crossed to the old laptop on her desk, opened it, and typed 2 words into the search bar. Blackwood Empire. The results froze her in front of the screen. Articles, images, screaming headlines flooded the page. The Blackwood family, the most powerful business empire in the Midwest. Rumors of ties to Chicago's underworld. Adrian Blackwood, the coldest young heir in the Mafia world. Eliza scrolled, and her heart seemed to stop when she saw another headline. William Blackwood, founder of the Blackwood Empire, mysteriously missing for 3 years. Son offers $5 million to anyone who finds him. She clicked the article, and the photograph that filled the screen made her clamp a hand over her mouth to keep from crying out. The man in the picture wore a sleek black suit, salt and pepper hair neatly combed, eyes sharp with authority. On the 4th finger of his hand, a gold ring engraved with a bee gleamed under the lights. Eliza turned her head to William lying on the sofa, then looked back at the photograph. The same ring, the same face, even if it was hollowed out and filthy now, the same man. The man she had been caring for was William Blackwood, the missing Mafia boss, Adrian Blackwood's father, the most powerful man in the Midwest, and someone was offering $5 million to find him. A knock at the door made Eliza jump. She snapped the laptop shut, hurried to the door, and found Lucy standing there, worry written all over her face. "You didn't come in this morning and I got scared, so I came by to check on you." Lucy stopped when she saw William on the sofa. Her eyes widened in horror. "Eliza, you brought that crazy man to your house?" Eliza pulled Lucy inside, closed the door, and told her everything. The storm, the fever, the drunk who attacked, William's terrifying fighting skill, and finally, what she had just found online. By the time Eliza finished, Lucy's face had gone pale, as if all the blood had drained out of her. $5 million? She whispered. "Eliza, you have to call, or at least call the police." Eliza shook her head, her voice firm. "Call the police for what? So they can hand him over to the Mafia? Or lock him in a psychiatric hospital and leave him there until he dies?" Lucy grabbed her shoulders, fear flooding her eyes. "But the Mafia, Eliza. You're hiding the father of a Mafia boss. If they find out, if their enemies find out, you'll be killed. Do you understand?" Eliza looked over at William, the man who had protected her from the drunk only hours earlier, the man now lying there weak and alone the way she had once been alone on the streets of Chicago. "Look at him, Lucy," Eliza said softly. "He's weak. He's suffering. He's lost his memory, lost his family, lost everything. Mafia or not, rich or poor, he's still a human being who needs help." Lucy let out a long breath and released her grip. You're going to be in serious trouble, Eliza. I know you want to help people, but this time it's different. Eliza gave her a sad, quiet smile. I know, but I can't abandon him. Not after what he did for me last night. Lucy stared at her for a long moment, then shook her head in helpless defeat. She knew nothing could change Eliza's mind once it was made up. She could only pray her friend's kindness wouldn't drag her straight into hell. That afternoon, after Lucy left with worry written all over her face, William woke up. Not the brief flicker of awareness Eliza had seen before, but real clarity. His eyes clear as he looked around the small apartment, and then settled on Eliza sitting beside him. He tried to sit up, his body still weak after the fever, but his gaze was sharp, fully present. You know who I am now, don't you? He asked, his voice hoarse but every word distinct. Eliza didn't lie. She nodded, silent, waiting. William let out a slow breath and lifted a hand to rub his forehead, as if trying to gather the broken pieces of memory into order. You looked it up, he said. Not a question, but a statement. You know about Blackwood, about Adrian, about the reward. Eliza studied him, her eyes full of questions that still had no answers. Then why don't you want me to contact your son? $5 million, Mr. Blackwood. Your son's been looking for you for 3 years. William took her hand, and Eliza was startled to feel his fingers tremble, not from weakness, but from fear. Please, he said, pleading like a child. Don't contact Adrian. Not yet. Please. But why? Eliza asked, not understanding. You need treatment. You need your family. Your son is... My enemies are still out there. William cut her off, his eyes darkening. They poisoned me, threw me away like trash, thinking I'd die. If they learn I'm still alive, they'll come back. And this time, they won't only kill me. His grip tightened, his voice shaking. They'll kill anyone connected to me. You, too. Adrian, too. Tears slid down the lined cheeks of William's face, and Eliza realized this was the first time she had seen him cry while fully awake. You're the only person who's treated me like a human being in 3 years, he whispered. You're the only family I have. Please don't put yourself in danger because of me. Eliza looked at the man in front of her, a former Mafia boss with power once beyond imagining, now crying like a child and begging her not to save him because he was terrified she'd be hurt, and she made a decision. All right, she said softly, giving his hand a gentle squeeze. I won't contact anyone. Not yet. But you have to let me take care of you. Properly. Not under that bridge anymore. William nodded, and something lit in his eyes that Eliza had never seen there before. Hope. The next day, Eliza found an abandoned storage building on the edge of town, the owner renting it out for almost nothing because it had been neglected for so long. She spent her entire day off cleaning, scrubbing, setting things in order. An old bed borrowed from the shelter, a wooden table someone had thrown out, a few plastic chairs, and a tiny portable gas burner. It wasn't luxurious, but it was warm, and safer than the underside of a bridge by 1,000 times. She brought William there that evening when no one was paying attention. And for the first time in 3 years, he had a roof over his head. The next 2 weeks passed like a dream. Every day after her shift at the shelter, Eliza went to the storage building to care for William. She cooked porridge for him, washed his clothes, sat and talked with him for hours. William slowly steadied, his delirious episodes growing less frequent, his moments of clarity lasting longer. He began to tell her about his life, about the wife he had loved down to the bone, about Adrian as a little boy, mischievous and stubborn, about the empire he had built from nothing but his own hands. Eliza listened, and she told him about herself, about her mother, about her stepfather, about the years she spent on the streets, about Martha and the shelter. They shared their pain, shared their loneliness, and little by little, between an old man with a shattered mind and a young woman who had been thrown away, a bond formed, not romantic love, something deeper, like a father and daughter who had never had the chance to be. But in a small town like Millbrook, no secret stayed hidden for long. Rumors began to spread like wildfire. That shelter girl is hiding the crazy man. I heard she even rented a storage building for him to live in. Must be something dirty going on between them. Those poisonous whispers reached Raymond Castillo one evening while he was drinking at the Way bar. He set his glass down, and his eyes sharpened with something dark and dangerous. The crazy man he wanted out of town was now being sheltered by that stubborn shelter girl. Raymond smiled, the smile of a man who had just found a way to destroy 2 enemies at once. The storm was coming, and Eliza had no idea. That night, Millbrook sank into its usual peaceful sleep. The streetlights flickered weakly, the houses sat dark, the streets lay empty, but near 2 a.m, the scream of fire sirens tore through the silence. Castillo's restaurant, Raymond's pride and the largest business in town, was burning fiercely. Flames licked up into the black sky, smoke rolling upward like a cloud from hell, the red glare reflecting on the horrified faces of townspeople pouring into the streets to watch. The fire trucks arrived, but it was too late. When the last of the flames was finally beaten down, the restaurant was nothing but a heap of charred ruins, the damage estimated in the millions of dollars. By morning, the news swept through town faster than the wind. Eliza was getting food ready to bring to William when she heard the commotion outside her apartment. She ran out, and her heart tightened until she could barely breathe when she saw a line of people moving toward the storage building where William was staying. At the front was Raymond Castillo, his face flushed with rage, followed by 2 police officers and a crowd of curious townspeople. Eliza ran after them, her feet barely touching the ground, fear rising and sticking in her throat. By the time she got there, the police had already forced the door, and William was being dragged outside in handcuffs, his face confused and terrified like an animal trapped with nowhere left to run. Raymond stood in the middle of the crowd, shouting like a madman. "I know he did it. I saw that crazy bastard lurking around my restaurant last night. He burned my place down. He destroyed my whole life." The crowd murmured, hateful eyes locking onto William. No one questioned it. No one asked for proof. The crazy man burned the rich man's restaurant. A simple story, easy to believe, so easy it didn't need evidence. Eliza shoved her way through the crowd and ran to stand in front of the officers. "Stop!" she shouted, her voice shaking but fierce. "He didn't do it. He was here all night. He couldn't have set that restaurant on fire." Raymond turned toward her, his eyes flashing with something poisonous. He stepped closer, his shadow spilling over Eliza as if it wanted to swallow her whole. "You're a witness?" he sneered, his voice heavy with contempt. "You, the girl who used to live on the streets like a stray dog, now standing here to defend this crazy man?" The crowd burst into laughter, the sound slicing into Eliza like knives. Raymond leaned in close to her ear, his voice a low, threatening whisper. "I know you've been hiding him. I know you rented this storage building for him. The 2 of you are going to pay. I promise you that." Then he turned to the crowd, his voice booming. "Look at this, everyone. That shelter girl is protecting an arsonist. She must be in on it too." Eliza wanted to scream, wanted to fight back, wanted to tell them the truth, but she stood there as if her feet were nailed to the ground, her mouth unable to form a single word. The scornful stares, the mocking laughter, the venomous whispers closed in from every side. She was 13 again, being beaten by her stepfather and too afraid to cry out. She was 18 again, thrown into the streets while no one even turned around to look. She was invisible again, abandoned again, someone no one believed. The officers dragged William past her, and in that moment, he lifted his head, his eyes briefly clearing as he looked straight into hers. "Eliza," he whispered, his voice breaking. Don't contact Adrian. Promise me. Don't let them find you." Then he was shoved into the police car, the door slammed shut, and the vehicle sped away, leaving Eliza standing alone in the middle of the crowd's laughter. She stood there for a long time. She didn't know how long. The crowd slowly dispersed. Raymond Castillo walked away, satisfied, brushing his hands as if cleaning them, and still Eliza stood on the dirt road, her eyes empty as she stared into nothing. No tears fell. She had cried too much in her life, until she had nothing left to cry with. She wanted to give up. She wanted to go back to her apartment, lock the door, and pretend none of this had happened. Maybe they were right. Maybe she was just a fool, trying to save someone who couldn't be saved, trying to protect someone the whole world wanted to destroy. But then she thought of William. She thought of his eyes when he protected her from the drunk in the storm. She thought of his voice when he told her, "You're the only family I have." She thought of his trembling hands when he begged her not to put herself in danger. He didn't burn that restaurant. She knew it. She was sure of it. So who did? And why was Raymond so certain William was guilty? Unless he knew who the real culprit was. Unless he was framing William to hide something. Eliza clenched her fists until her nails dug into her palms, sharp with pain. She lifted her head, and something flared in her eyes that she thought she'd lost long ago. Determination. She had no money. She had no power. She had no one on her side, but she had something Raymond Castillo would never have. She knew William was innocent, and she would prove it. Even if she had to turn the whole town upside down, even if she had to stand against the most powerful man in Millbrook, even if it cost her everything, she turned and walked away, leaving the empty storage building behind her. The truth was out there somewhere, and she would find it. At the same time, more than 200 miles from Millbrook, Adrian Blackwood sat in his private office in Chicago, surrounded by glass walls that looked out over the city at night. On his desk, the files on his father's disappearance were stacked like a mountain, pages yellowed after 3 years of being turned over and over until the paper itself seemed tired. Adrian was exhausted, worn down to the bone, almost out of hope. Hundreds of leads had brought him to hundreds of dead ends, and each failure felt like another piece of his heart cracking away. He had begun to accept that maybe his father was dead, that maybe he would never even find the body, that maybe he would have to live with this guilt for the rest of his life. The door flew open, snapping Adrian's head up. Frank Moretti rushed in, face flushed, breathing hard as if he'd just run a marathon. In 20 years at Adrian's side, Frank had never lost his composure like this. "Boss," Frank shouted, his voice shaking with emotion. "We've got news. Big news." Adrian shot to his feet, his heart thundering even as he tried to keep his face steady. "Talk." Frank swallowed and forced himself to breathe. "Millbrook, a small town about 200 miles south of here. There's a homeless man, around 60, been there since 3 years ago. They call him Crazy Will. He was just arrested for arson, for burning down a restaurant." Adrian frowned. "So what? Thousands of homeless people get arrested every day." Frank stepped closer, his eyes burning bright. "He's wearing a gold ring, engraved with the letter B." The world stopped turning in that instant. Adrian stood frozen, not breathing, not moving, nothing but the sound of his own heartbeat pounding like war drums inside his chest. The ring with the B, the ring his mother had placed on his father's finger on their wedding day. The ring his father never took off, not even to sleep. The ring Adrian had been hunting for 3 long years. "Is the source reliable?" Adrian asked, his voice rough. "One of our guys is in that area," Frank said. He saw a local news segment, recognized the ring, and called in immediately. "Boss, I think this is real. I think it's Mr. William." Adrian wanted to believe. God, he wanted to believe more than he'd ever wanted anything. But fear had rooted itself deep in his bones after 3 years of one failure after another. He walked to the window, stared out at the city, and a painful memory slammed into him like a nightmare. 2 years earlier, he'd gotten word his father was in Detroit. A solid lead, a trusted source, a specific address. Adrian had taken 50 men and stormed in with his heart full of hope, and it had been a trap. His enemies had used false information to lure him into an ambush. He lost 12 men that night, and nearly lost his own life. Since then, every lead had been a double-edged blade, offering hope with one hand and fear with the other. "What if it's a trap?" Adrian whispered, pain thick in his voice. "What if they're using my father to lure me again? What if I go there and lose more men?" Frank stepped beside him and put a hand on his shoulder. "Boss, that ring belongs to Mr. William and no one else. It can't be faked. No one knows how important it is except the Blackwood family." Adrian was silent, his eyes locked on the darkness beyond the glass. 3 years, 1,995 days, millions of dollars, countless sleepless nights, countless times hope had risen, only to be crushed. And now, maybe, just maybe, his father was only 200 miles away, sitting in a police station in a small town he'd never even heard of. Adrian turned back, his eyes cold as ice and burning with determination. "Get 20 men ready, armored vehicles, full weapons." Frank nodded. "If it's your father, I'm bringing him home. And if it's a trap?" Adrian pulled a gun from his desk drawer, checked the magazine, then slid it into the holster at his hip. "They'll regret ever touching the Blackwood family." Half an hour later, a convoy of black vehicles left Chicago in the night, driving south at maximum speed. Adrian sat in the lead car, his hand clenched around a photograph of his father, his lips moving like a prayer. "Please be alive, Dad. I'm coming. This time, I won't be late again." While Adrian's convoy was racing toward Millbrook, Eliza began her own investigation. She went all over town, knocking on door after door, asking anyone she could find about the night of the fire. But no one wanted to talk to her. Some people slammed the door in her face. Some shook their heads hard and walked away. Some looked at her the way you look at someone carrying a contagious disease. Raymond Castillo was the most powerful man in town, and no one dared stand on the side of the person challenging him. Eliza was close to breaking, until she caught a scrap of gossip from the vegetable vendor at the market. "Poor Jennifer," the woman whispered to the seller beside her. "I heard that night she drove to the restaurant drunk to get money. Her father must be furious." Eliza stopped, her ears pricking like a cat hearing a mouse. Jennifer, Raymond's daughter. She had been at the restaurant that night. Eliza spent the entire day digging into Jennifer Castillo, a 24-year-old, Raymond's spoiled darling, known for partying hard and drinking too much. Some people said she'd been to rehab twice and failed both times. Some said she regularly stumbled into her father's restaurant to take cash when she was drunk. And some said that on the night of the fire, they saw Jennifer's car parked near the restaurant. The pieces began to slide into place in Eliza's mind, but she needed proof. She needed someone willing to testify. And she thought of Brenda. Brenda had been a server at Castillo's restaurant for 5 years, a 35-year-old single mother with a little daughter. If anyone knew what really happened that night, it would be her. Eliza went to Brenda's small house on the edge of town, an aging place with weeds choking the front yard and a rotting wooden fence. She knocked, and Brenda opened the door with a face as pale as if she'd seen a ghost. "Who are you?" Brenda asked, her voice trembling, her eyes flicking left and right as if she was afraid someone was watching. "I'm Eliza. I work at the shelter. I need to ask you a few questions about the night of the fire." Brenda stepped back, the doorway narrowing. "I don't know anything. Please go." "Brenda, please," Eliza begged. "That old man is innocent. He didn't burn the restaurant. I know you know that." Brenda shook her head, tears gathering in her eyes. "I can't. I have a child. If Mr. Castillo finds out I talked to you, he'll fire me. He'll ruin my life. Please, you have to understand." She started to close the door, but Eliza put her hand out to stop it. "Brenda," she said, her voice gentle but heavy with pain, "I know what fear feels like. I know what it feels like when someone more powerful threatens you, controls you, makes you afraid to even breathe." Brenda paused, staring at her with wary eyes. Eliza drew a deep breath, then pushed her sleeve up, showing Brenda the pale scars on her wrist. "My stepfather abused me for 10 years, Eliza said, her voice shaking but not stopping. 10 years of being beaten, locked in a closet, starved. 10 years of not daring to say a word because I was afraid he'd kill me." She pointed to the scar, tears running down her cheeks. "This is what silence did to me. When I was 17, I was so lost that I almost let the darkness win. I carried that pain in silence for years." Brenda stood frozen, eyes wide, tears beginning to spill. Eliza went on, her words thick in her throat. "I understand you're scared. I understand you have a child you need to protect. But Brenda, that old man is a human being too. He has a family too. He's innocent, and they're going to destroy his life just because someone wants to hide the truth." She took Brenda's hand, her voice pleading. "You can help him. You can break the silence. Please, don't let him suffer the way I suffered." Brenda broke into sobs, her body shaking like a leaf in the wind. Then she opened the door wider, pulled Eliza inside, and shut it behind them. They sat on a worn sofa in the small living room, and Brenda began to speak, her voice splintered by tears. That night, Jennifer came to the restaurant at around 1 in the morning. She was drunk, staggering, and she went into Mr. Castillo's office to take money from the safe. I was still there cleaning, so I saw it all. Brenda swallowed hard and kept going. She knocked over a candle on the table. The fire caught the curtains, then spread everywhere. Jennifer panicked and ran out. She didn't call the fire department. She didn't warn anyone. "Does Mr. Castillo know?" Eliza asked, her heart pounding. Brenda nodded, fear filling her eyes. "He knows. He watched security footage from the convenience store across the street. It clearly shows Jennifer running out of the back door in a panic at the exact moment the fire flared up in the window. But instead of admitting it, he blamed the crazy old man so he could collect insurance and protect his daughter. He told me to stay quiet, said if I opened my mouth he'd fire me, make sure no one in this town would ever hire me again." Eliza gripped Brenda's hand, her heart screaming with fierce relief. "The convenience store camera? Is that video still there?" Brenda nodded. Mr. Castillo had already bribed the local police to ignore the footage, and he thought his men had seized the original recorder. But the store owner, who had witnessed your kindness to the old man, secretly made a backup copy before the evidence could be destroyed. Eliza stood, her eyes bright as fire. Brenda, will you testify? Will you tell the truth in front of the whole town? Brenda trembled, but then she looked into Eliza's eyes, looked at the scar on Eliza's wrist, and something inside her shifted. I'm scared, she whispered, but I don't want to be silent anymore. I'll testify. Eliza hugged Brenda, her tears mixing with the tears of a stranger who had become an ally. The truth was there now. The evidence was there. Now all she needed was the courage to drag it into the light. The town meeting was held the next afternoon in Millbrook Central Square. Mayor Keller stood on the wooden platform, with Raymond Castillo beside him in a sleek black suit and a face arranged into carefully rehearsed grief. The townspeople gathered in a thick crowd, murmuring about the fire, about the crazy man who burned the restaurant, about what should happen to the guilty. Eliza stood at the edge of the crowd, her hand clenched around the phone that held the video she had gotten from the convenience store owner across from the restaurant. Beside her, Brenda trembled, pale as paper, but with determination burning in her eyes. They were ready. Raymond stepped up to the microphone, his voice carrying over the square like the lament of a wronged man. My friends, he began, his tone heavy with sorrow. Castillo's restaurant wasn't only my family's property. It was something my wife, Linda, and I built with our own 2 hands. It's the last memory I have left of her. He paused, lifted a hand to dab at the corner of his eye as if wiping tears, though anyone who looked closely could see his eyes were dry. And now it's been burned to the ground by a madman our town has tolerated far too long. The crowd nodded, angry whispers spreading through the square. Raymond went on, his voice rising. I demand justice. I demand that crazy man pay for what he's done, not only for me, but for the safety of all of us. You're lying. Eliza's voice cut through the crowd like thunder on a clear day. Heads snapped toward her, including Raymond's, his expression flickering for a split second before settling back into a mask of calm. Eliza stepped forward, and the crowd parted automatically as if she carried a sickness. She stopped before the platform and lifted her chin, looking Raymond straight in the eyes. You're lying, she repeated, loud and clear. That old man didn't burn your restaurant. Your daughter did, and you know it. The crowd stirred, a wave of murmurs rolling across the square. Raymond stepped down from the platform and strode up to Eliza, his face flushed with rage. Shut your mouth, he roared, his voice like an animal's. Who are you to slander my family? You're just some street girl who used to live like a dog, and now you stand here talking trash about decent people? Eliza didn't step back, even though her legs were shaking. I have proof, video from the camera across the street, and I have a witness. Raymond gave a sharp laugh, but it couldn't hide the panic flashing in his eyes. Proof? A witness? You think anyone's going to believe you? You crazy little nobody? Then, before Eliza could react, he lifted his hand and slapped her across the face. A brutal, ringing blow in the middle of the town square. Eliza went down, her cheek burning, blood seeping from her lip. The crowd fell silent in shocked stillness, but no one stepped forward to help her. Raymond stood over her, his shadow swallowing her like a demon. This is what happens to anyone who dares stand against me, he bellowed, turning to the crowd as if warning them all. But Eliza didn't stay down crying. She pushed herself up slowly, wiped the blood from her mouth, and her eyes burned with a light nothing could extinguish. I have proof, she said again, her voice trembling but not weak. She lifted her phone high. Security footage. It shows Jennifer Castillo drunk, knocking over a candle, starting the fire, and running away. She pressed play, and the video lit up on her screen. Jennifer staggering inside the restaurant, the candle tipping on the table, the flames flaring up, Jennifer panicking and bolting for the door, without ever looking back. People surged closer to watch, the whispers turning into furious shouting. And right then, Brenda stepped out of the crowd, her voice shaking but carrying. She's telling the truth. I work at the restaurant. I was there that night. I saw everything. Jennifer started the fire, and Mr. Castillo knew from the beginning but blamed an innocent old man so he could collect insurance money. Raymond lunged at Eliza, trying to rip the phone from her hand, but it was too late. A local reporter had captured it all on camera. The police had seen the footage, and the crowd had heard the truth. 2 officers stepped in and snapped handcuffs on Raymond Castillo, right there in the square. He screamed and cursed, but no one listened. Jennifer was summoned immediately. Mayor Keller stood frozen, his face drained of color, unable to meet anyone's eyes. And then the door of the police car opened. William stepped out, and his posture was no longer bent the way it had been before. He stood straight, shoulders squared, his eyes blazing with a kind of light Eliza had never seen in him through all the months before. He walked toward her while the crowd fell into silence, watching. Eliza stood there, her cheek still red, her lip still bleeding, but she smiled. William stopped in front of her, tears shining in his eyes, his voice hoarse but every word clear. "Thank you, Eliza. You saved me. For the second time." Eliza wanted to speak, but her throat tightened. She could only nod as tears ran down her cheeks. The crowd around them was still buzzing, but in that moment, the world seemed to hold only the two of them. An old man the whole town had despised, and a young woman the whole world had abandoned. They had found each other in the dark, and together they had stepped into the light. But neither of them knew that in only a few minutes, the growl of engines from a line of black vehicles out of Chicago would rise at the end of the road, and a larger truth would finally be revealed. The roar of engines thundered from the end of the road, and everyone in the square turned at once. 5 glossy black Escalades tore into town like an invading army, tires screaming on the asphalt. The vehicles stopped right in the middle of the square, lined up like a steel wall, and the people of Millbrook began to back away in fear. No one in this little town had ever seen anything like it. Doors opened, and 20 men in black suits stepped out, faces hard as ice, eyes sweeping the crowd like hunting hawks. They fanned out on both sides, forming a corridor, and from the lead vehicle, one man stepped down. Adrian Blackwood stood in the center of Millbrook Square like an emperor among common folk. A perfectly tailored black suit, black hair combed neatly back, cold eyes taking in everything around him with the disdain of someone who held absolute power in his hands. And then his gaze stopped, and all that coldness vanished in an instant. Less than 10 steps away stood an old man, hair white and tangled, clothes wrinkled and worn, yet standing upright and looking at him with eyes full of tears. The gold ring on that man's finger glinted in the afternoon sun, the engraved B shining like a confirmation of what Adrian hadn't dared to believe for 3 years. "Dad?" Adrian's voice came out rough and shaking. Nothing left of the powerful, icy Mafia Boss, only the voice of a son who had searched for his father through 1,000 days and nights. William Blackwood looked at his son, his lips trembling, tears rolling down the lined grooves of his face. "Adrian," he whispered, choking on the name. "My son." Adrian moved forward, step by step, slow as if he feared that if he rushed, the vision in front of him would dissolve like a dream. 3 years. 3 years of searching. 3 years of blaming himself. 3 years of waking in the night, with the nightmare of the night his father vanished. And now his father was standing here, alive, looking at him with eyes Adrian thought he would never see again. When Adrian reached William, his knees gave out. The most powerful mafia boss in the Midwest dropped to his knees in the middle of a small town square, crying like a child in front of his father. "Dad," he sobbed, both hands gripping William's hands as if he might disappear. I'm sorry. I was late. I've been looking for you for 3 years. I never stopped looking. I'm sorry, Dad." William pulled his son up and wrapped him in his arms, his own body shaking with sobs. "It's not your fault," he whispered into Adrian's ear. "I'm alive. I'm here. You found me." The people of Millbrook stood frozen, staring at what they were seeing, mouths open, unable to speak. They didn't understand what was happening. The crazy man they'd despised, thrown stones at, wanted to drive out of town, was now being called father by a convoy of men in million-dollar vehicles. Raymond Castillo, standing handcuffed beside the police car, went pale as a corpse when he recognized the Blackwood logo on the vehicle doors. "Blackwood," he whispered, his voice trembling with horror. "The Blackwood family. My God, that crazy man is William Blackwood." Mayor Keller stood nearby, legs shaking so hard it looked like he might collapse. He had almost prosecuted the father of the most notorious mafia boss in the Midwest. He had almost signed papers to expel a man whose name alone was enough to make all of Chicago tremble. After holding his father for a long time, Adrian slowly let go, his eyes still red, but his composure returning in pieces. He turned and looked around, taking in the crowd shrinking back in fear, taking in Raymond trembling in handcuffs, taking in Keller trying to fold into himself as if he could vanish. Then Adrian's gaze landed on one person. A thin, brown-haired girl, her cheek still flushed from the slap, blood still on her lip, standing a few steps away and looking at him without fear. She didn't retreat like the others. She didn't lower her eyes like the others. She simply stood there and looked at him, as if he were just an ordinary man, not someone who held thousands of lives in his hands. William took Adrian's hand and guided him toward Eliza. "Adrian," he said, his voice weak but filled with pride. "Her. She's the one who saved me. She fed me every day when this whole town wanted me dead. She's cared for me for months. She just stood up for me in front of everyone, got beaten and humiliated, and she never backed down." Adrian looked at Eliza, his eyes taking in the bruise on her cheek, the blood on her lip, the worn-out clothes on her body. This girl, who looked like she didn't have 2 pennies to rub together, had done what his $5 million reward and his hundreds of men couldn't do. She had found his father. She had cared for his father. She had saved his father. He stepped in front of her, his gaze searching, no longer as cold as before. "Who are you?" he asked, low and serious. Eliza lifted her chin and met his eyes without flinching. "I'm Eliza Monroe. And he—" she tipped her head slightly toward William. "Is your father, isn't he?" Adrian studied her for a long moment, and then something in his eyes shifted. No longer the look of a mafia boss staring down at someone beneath him, the look of a man trying to understand the woman who had done the impossible. "We need to talk," he said. "You did what $5 million couldn't. I want to know why." The storage building where Eliza had once cared for William had now been turned into a temporary medical station. Adrian's private medical team flew in from Chicago only a few hours after the convoy arrived in Millbrook, bringing modern equipment and expensive medicine. William lay on a portable bed, hooked to an IV, and given a full medical evaluation, his face already less hollow than it had been when Eliza first found him. Adrian sat beside his father and didn't take his eyes off him for even a second, as if he feared that if he blinked, his father would vanish again. Eliza stood in the corner, quietly watching the reunion of the Blackwood father and son, and inside her a strange feeling rose, happiness for William, and a sharp ache at the thought of the family she had never had. When the doctor finished the exam and stepped outside to prepare his report, Adrian rose and walked over to Eliza. He studied her for a long moment, eyes sharp as if he were trying to read every thought inside her head. "When did you find out who my father was?" he asked, low and serious. Eliza didn't dodge his gaze. "About 2 weeks ago. I found it online after he talked in delirium and said the name Blackwood and Adrian." Adrian's brow tightened. "So you knew about the $5 million reward?" "I did." "Then why didn't you contact me?" $5 million, Miss Monroe. You could have been rich for the rest of your life. You could have left this town and started over. Why didn't you?" Eliza was quiet for a moment. Then she looked at William on the bed, his eyes following her with endless gratitude. "Because he asked me not to," she said softly. "He said his enemies were still out there. He was afraid that if I contacted you, they'd find me and kill me. He wanted to protect me, even though he was the one who needed protecting more than anyone." Adrian went still, unable to speak. His father, even shattered, even living like a beggar, had still thought first about protecting someone else before thinking about himself. It was exactly who his father had always been before he disappeared. Always putting others first. Always sacrificing for the people he loved. 3 years ago, Adrian began, his voice dropping. "A traitor inside our organization poisoned my father. An Eastern European toxin designed to destroy the nervous system, wipe memory clean, and turn the victim into a madman. They wanted him to die slowly, in pain, stripped of everything before he finally stopped breathing." He paused. Fists clenched so hard his knuckles went white. They dumped him on the street like trash, thinking he'd be dead in a few days. "I searched for 3 years and found nothing. I almost gave up." Just then, the doctor came back in, a middle-aged man with graying hair and gold-rimmed glasses. "Boss," he said, amazement in his voice. "I've completed the evaluation, and I have to tell you, this is something I've never seen in 30 years of practice." Adrian turned, tension tightening his eyes. "How is he? Can he recover?" The doctor nodded slowly. "That toxin caused severe neurological damage. In theory, with this level of injury, Mr. Williams shouldn't be able to speak in complete sentences, shouldn't recognize anyone, shouldn't even be able to eat or drink on his own, but he's recovered far beyond expectations. So far beyond that it's almost a miracle." Adrian frowned. Why? An antidote? The doctor shook his head, then looked at Eliza. Not medicine. Her. Eliza flinched, confused. The doctor continued, calm and precise. That toxin destroys neural connections. It cuts the patient off from reality. But in rare cases, if the patient has a strong enough emotional bond, an anchor to hold on to, the brain will use it like a lifeline to pull itself back. He looked at Eliza with unmistakable respect. You became that anchor. Your kindness, your care, your patience every single day gave Mr. Williams something to hold on to. Without you, he might have died long ago. Or worse, lived on as if he were already dead. Adrian turned to Eliza, and this time his eyes were completely different. The cold scrutiny of a mafia boss was gone. The suspicion of a man who had been betrayed too many times was gone. In its place was something softer, warmer, something he couldn't even name. You did what $5 million and the best doctors couldn't, he said, low and sincere. Eliza shook her head, eyes dropping to the floor. I didn't do anything special. I just treated him like a human being, something everyone should have done. Adrian was quiet for a long time, then he murmured, as if speaking more to himself than to her. You're different from everyone I've ever met. And for the first time in his life, Adrian Blackwood didn't know what to do with the feeling rising in his chest. That night, when the storage building settled into quiet and the medical team had stepped outside, Adrian sat beside his father's bed, gripping the thin, bony hand as if letting go would make him disappear again. William lay there, his eyes clearer than they had been at any point since the poisoning, looking at his son with a mixture of love and pain. My son, he said, his voice hoarse but fully lucid. I'm sorry. Adrian tightened his hold and shook his head. You don't need to apologize. You're alive. That's enough. That's all I need. But William didn't stop, his eyes shining with tears as the hard memories returned. 3 years, Adrian. 3 years I forgot you. I forgot who you were. Forgot that my only son was out there searching for me. There were nights I looked up at the sky and felt like someone was calling me, but I couldn't remember who it was. Do you know how painful that is? Adrian bowed his head, and his tears fell onto his father's hand. I don't blame you. Not ever. It's my fault. I should have protected you. I should have been there on your birthday night instead of chasing meetings. If I'd come home on time. William lifted his hand, rested it against his son's cheek, and cut him off. It's not your fault. Don't ever think that. I don't want you living with that guilt for the rest of your life. He gave a faint smile, and in that moment Adrian saw his father the way he had been 3 years ago, a man of authority, but filled with love, the man Adrian had admired more than anyone in the world. William was quiet for a while, then he asked softly, Do you know why I'm still alive today? Adrian nodded. The doctor said she became your anchor. Her kindness helped you hold on to reality. William smiled, his eyes brightening at the thought of Eliza. She's special, Adrian. I've met a lot of people in my life, but no one like her. She fed me when she didn't have enough to eat herself. She protected me when the whole town wanted me dead. She saw the human being inside a filthy, raving madman everyone despised. He paused, and his voice dropped with a longing that hurt. She reminds me of your mother. Adrian went quiet, his heart twisting at the mention of his mother. She died when he was 10, but he still remembered her smile, her warm hands, the way she always put others ahead of herself. His father always said she was the gentlest, bravest woman he had ever known, and now he was comparing Eliza to her. Adrian. William squeezed his son's hand, his voice more serious than ever. I want you to promise me 2 things. Adrian looked at him and nodded without hesitation. Anything, Dad. William drew a deep breath, as if gathering what strength he had left to say the words. First, protect her, Eliza. She protected me when I couldn't protect myself. Now it's your turn. Make sure no one can hurt her. Adrian nodded. I promise. William went on, his eyes locked deep into his son's. Second, be a better man. Not only a boss, not only someone who holds power. Be the kind of man I'm proud of. Be the kind of man your mother would be proud of if she were still alive. Adrian lowered his head again, tears falling onto his father's hand. He had spent the last 3 years in darkness, in hatred, in guilt. He had done ruthless things to find his father, had become someone he barely recognized. But now, watching his father lying there and hearing those words, he understood he had to change. I promise, Dad, he whispered, voice breaking. I'll protect her, and I'll be a better man. I swear it. William smiled, satisfied, his eyes slowly closing in peace. Good. Now I can rest. Adrian stayed by his father through the night, and for the first time in 3 years, he felt peace. 3 days passed like a dream. William received proper care, and his health returned so quickly that even the doctors were astonished. Adrian stayed in Millbrook, never more than a step away from his father, while quietly running his operations in Chicago through his phone. Eliza still came every day, bringing homemade food and the warm smile both William and Adrian had begun to wait for. Everything seemed peaceful, as if the nightmare had finally ended. But darkness never sleeps for long. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, Frank Moretti rushed into the storage building, face pale, sweat pouring down his forehead. "Boss," he panted, voice tight with worry. "We've got bad news. Very bad." Adrian stood, and his eyes snapped back into the cold sharpness of a mafia boss. "Say it." Frank swallowed and glanced at William on the bed before turning back to Adrian. "The traitor from 3 years ago. He had partners. We thought we wiped them out, but a group survived. They've been hiding in Mexico for 3 years, waiting for an opening." He paused, his voice shaking. "They know Mr. William is alive. The news spread after what happened in the square, and they're coming to Millbrook. Right now." Adrian clenched his jaw, fists tightening until his knuckles went white. "How many?" "At least 30. Heavy weapons. They want to finish what they started, boss. They want Mr. William dead." Adrian ordered security tightened at once, called in more men from Chicago, posted guards across town. But he knew it wasn't enough. Millbrook was small and exposed, with none of the defensive advantages he had in Chicago. If the enemy hit with that kind of force, the losses would be brutal. He needed to get his father out, fast, and he needed to get Eliza out with him. He went to the shelter, found Eliza working, and pulled her outside with a grave expression. "You have to leave, right now." Eliza looked at him, suspicion in her eyes. "What happened?" Adrian explained quickly. "The enemy's on the way, the danger closing in. Anyone connected to my father is in danger. And you'll be their first target after him. You cared for him. You protected him. They won't spare you." He gripped her shoulders. "Urgent. I'm taking you somewhere safe. You'll have protection 24/7 until this is over." Eliza was quiet for a moment. Then she gently removed Adrian's hands from her shoulders. "I'm not going." Adrian stared at her. "Are you out of your mind? They'll kill you." Eliza held his gaze, steady and unshaken. "I've lived my whole life in fear, Adrian. Afraid of my stepfather. Afraid of the streets. Afraid of people. I've been running for 28 years. She shook her head, her voice hardening with resolve. "I don't want to run anymore. And if I leave, they might come here looking for me. They could hurt Martha, or the others. I can't let that happen. Mr. William is my family. He's the first person besides Martha who's treated me like a daughter. I'm not abandoning my family." Adrian went still, words gone. She called his father family. She, with no blood tie to them at all, was willing to face deadly danger for a man she'd only known a few months. He wanted to shout that she was reckless, that she was foolish, that she didn't understand how ruthless those men were. But when he looked into her eyes, he knew nothing he said would change her mind. That night, darkness swallowed Millbrook. Adrian posted guards everywhere, moved his father into the safest room, and ordered Eliza to stay inside the shelter with Martha. But the enemy didn't come from the direction he expected. They didn't attack head-on the way he'd predicted. They waited, watched, and found the weakest point in his defenses. At midnight, the power in the shelter suddenly cut out. While the guards outside were struggling with a sudden high-tech signal jammer that cut their communications and a coordinated tactical diversion at the perimeter, the enemies exploited the resulting blind spot. Eliza was making one last round through the rooms, unaware that the security grid had been compromised. A shadow struck from behind. She didn't have time to scream. A hand clamped over her mouth. The sharp sting of anesthetic flooded her nose, and the world fell into black. When Adrian got the news, he was sitting beside his father's bed. His phone buzzed, and a cold voice came through the line. "Blackwood, we've got your girl. That sweet shelter girl. Would be ashamed to ruin that pretty face." Adrian's jaw locked, his voice ice. "If you touch her, I swear I'll burn every one of you alive." The voice on the other end laughed. You're not in a position to threaten us, Blackwood. We want William. Trade him for the girl. You've got 2 hours. After that, she dies." The call ended. Adrian smashed the phone into the wall and roared like a wounded animal. Frank ran in, his face drained. "Boss, what do we do?" Adrian stood there, chest heaving, eyes bloodshot with rage and despair. If he gave up his father would die. If he didn't, Eliza would die. The girl who saved his father, the girl his father begged him to protect, the girl who refused to run because she called them family. He had promised his father he would protect her. He couldn't break that promise. But he couldn't lose his father again either. "Get everyone ready," he growled, his eyes blazing with determination. "We're getting her back, no matter what it costs." William heard every word of the conversation between Adrian and Frank. He pushed himself up from the bed, his body still weak, but his eyes burning with a determination Adrian hadn't seen since finding his father again. "She was taken because of me," William said, his voice low and solid. "I'm going." Adrian turned to him, his expression changing fast. "Are you out of your mind? You just started recovering. You can't face them like this." But William didn't back down. He stepped up to his son and set a hand on Adrian's shoulder. "Adrian, listen to me. She saved me. She cared for me when the whole world abandoned me. She refused to run because she considers us family." He looked straight into his son's eyes, his voice thick with emotion but filled with strength. "Now I save her. That's how people live, Adrian. Not mafia. People." Adrian wanted to shout him down, wanted to lock his father inside the safe room and handle everything himself. But when he looked into his father's eyes, he knew nothing would stop him. This was William Blackwood, the man who built an empire from nothing, the man who survived 3 assassination attempts before the poisoning. His body might be weak, but his will was steel. "So what's your plan?" Adrian asked, accepting that he couldn't change his father's decision. William nodded, and for a moment his gaze turned razor-sharp, the way it must have looked back when he still sat on the throne of the Blackwood Empire. "I'll go in and meet them. Buy time. You and your men surround the building from the back. When I give the signal, you hit them." Frank stepped forward, worry in his voice. "The risk is too high. What if they don't wait? What if they kill you right away?" William smiled, the smile of a man who had seen death too many times to fear it now. "They won't kill me right away. They want to torture me. They want me to suffer before I die. That's their weakness, and I'm going to use it." An hour later, the abandoned factory at the edge of town lay swallowed in darkness. The enemy had taken it over, 30 men armed to the teeth, holding Eliza in a second-floor room. She was tied to a chair, her mouth sealed with tape, her eyes wide with fear but without tears. She had lived through too much pain to have tears left for herself. She only prayed William and Adrian wouldn't come, wouldn't trade lives for hers. She didn't deserve it, but she knew they would, because that was who they were. William walked into the factory alone, his steps slow but his head held high. The leader, a thick-bodied man with a scar running down his face, let out a harsh laugh when he saw him. "William Blackwood. So you finally decided to show up. You know, 3 years ago I thought you were dead. I was disappointed when I heard you were still breathing." William stopped a few steps away, his voice strangely calm. "Victor, I remember you. You used to mop floors in my house." Victor's face turned red with rage as he yanked out his gun and aimed it at William. "Shut up. Who the hell do you think you are? You're just an old man about to die." William didn't flinch. "Before you kill me, answer one question. Why? Why betray the Blackwood family?" Victor laughed like a madman and started talking, spilling out grievances, humiliations, years of resentment, years of being looked down on. He talked and talked, drunk on his own rage, not realizing time was passing, and shadows were moving outside the factory. Gunfire ripped through the night. Adrian and 20 of his men struck from every side, sudden and brutal. Chaos exploded. Screaming, shots, shattering glass echoing through the building. William seized the moment and surged toward the stairs leading to Eliza. 2 guards tried to block him, but his body reacted on instinct, the instinct of a man who had once been a fighter. He slipped the first shot, tore the gun from the first man's hand, and slammed the butt of it into the second man's face. Pain tore through him, his muscles screaming with exhaustion, but he didn't stop. Eliza was ahead. He had to reach her. He kicked the door to the room open, and his heart shattered at the sight of Eliza bound to the chair, her face drained of color, her eyes huge with terror. He rushed to her, cut the ropes, ripped the tape away. "Sir," Eliza sobbed, "why did you come? They'll kill you." William pulled her into his arms, his voice warm even as he fought for breath. "You saved your father with kindness. I save you the only way I know. Now we're even." In that moment, Victor burst into the room, his face smeared with blood, his eyes wild. "I'm going to kill you both." He raised the gun, but William moved faster. He shoved Eliza aside, lunged at Victor, and with the last of his strength, knocked the gun from his hand. They crashed to the floor. Victor was stronger, but William knew exactly where to strike. He locked Victor's throat with a lethal precision that didn't require strength, only technique, squeezing firmly until the man finally stopped fighting. Adrian ran in just as William released Victor and collapsed to the ground. "Dad," Adrian screamed, dropping to catch him. William lay in his son's arms, breathing hard, his face ghost pale with exhaustion, but his mouth held a smile. "Is she safe?" "She's safe, Dad. She's safe." William nodded, his eyes slowly closing. "Good. I can rest now." Eliza dropped to her knees beside him, tears streaming down her face. "Please, don't die. Please don't die." William didn't answer, but his chest still rose and fell. He was alive, broken down, but alive. And tonight, that was enough. A week passed after that terrifying night. William was brought back to the Blackwood estate in Chicago, where the best doctors watched over him 24 hours a day. He recovered quickly, the vitality of a man who had survived so many storms astonishing everyone all over again. Eliza was invited to stay at the estate, but after a few days, she asked to return to Millbrook. She missed the shelter, missed Martha, missed the work she loved. Adrian didn't stop her, but he stationed protection on her around the clock, no matter how much she protested. That afternoon, Adrian came to Millbrook to see Eliza. He found her sitting on an old wooden chair on the shelter porch, watching the sunset paint the sky red. He sat down beside her and stayed quiet for a long time before he finally spoke. "You saved my father. You refused to run when danger came. You almost died because of my family." He turned to look at her, and his eyes weren't cold the way they had been the first day they met. "I owe you a debt I can't repay, but I want to try. What do you want, Eliza? Money, a home, a job in Chicago, anything. You just have to say it." Eliza didn't answer right away, her eyes still on the sunset fading by degrees. She thought about what Adrian was offering. Money. She could have millions of dollars, enough to live comfortably for the rest of her life without ever worrying again. A home. She could have a luxury apartment in Chicago, escape the damp little room she lived in now. Work. She could have a high position inside the Blackwood Empire, never again working herself raw at the shelter for a small paycheck. Everything she had never even dared to dream of was suddenly within reach. But then she thought of Martha, the woman who had saved her years ago. She thought of the shelter, so desperate for funding it might have to close within a few months. She thought of the homeless people William had once been, the homeless person she had once been, all of them needing a place to go. "Martha's shelter is about to shut down," Eliza said, her voice soft but steady. "They don't have enough money to keep running. If you want to repay me, help them, not me." Adrian stared at her, his eyes widening in disbelief. "You could have millions. You could have a home in Chicago, a comfortable life. You could leave this small town forever. And you choose the shelter?" Eliza turned to him, and her eyes caught the last light of the sunset. "Money didn't save me when I was 19, Adrian. Martha saved me. The shelter saved me. They gave me a roof. They gave me food. They gave me a reason to keep living when I didn't want to live anymore." She looked down at her hands, at the pale scars on her wrist. "I want more people like Martha, more places like the shelter, more second chances, so no one has to go through what I went through." Adrian sat there, speechless. He had met thousands of people in his life, from politicians to criminals, from businessmen to beggars. Every one of them wanted something from him. Money, power, protection. No one, not a single one, had ever turned down a chance at a new life to help someone else, until this girl. This thin girl in worn clothes, with scars on her wrist, with a past he could barely imagine. She could have everything, and she asked for only one thing: help the people she had once been. "You know," Adrian said quietly, "you're different from everyone I've ever met." Eliza gave a small smile. You've already said that, because it's true, and every time I'm with you, I see it more clearly. He turned to her, and in the fading sunset, his eyes softened in a way even he didn't recognize. My father said you remind him of my mother. She was someone who always put others ahead of herself. Eliza looked at him, her eyes shining with tears. I don't deserve to be compared to anyone. I just do what I think is right. Adrian lifted a hand and gently touched her cheek, where the bruise from Raymond's slap still lingered faintly. That's exactly why you're special, he whispered. They sat there in silence, shoulder to shoulder, watching the sun sink below the horizon. And for the first time, both of them felt something beginning to grow between them, something they weren't ready to name yet. 6 months passed like the most beautiful dream Eliza had never dared to imagine. Second Chance Shelter was rebuilt from the ground up, a solid 3-story building with full facilities, enough space for 50 homeless people every night. Martha Chen stood in front of the new building on opening day, tears streaming down her cheeks, unable to believe that the dream of her entire life had finally become real. She was awarded Woman of the Year by the largest charitable organization in the state of Illinois, and the photo of her hugging Eliza on the day she accepted the award appeared on the front page of the local paper. Raymond Castillo was sentenced to 10 years in prison for insurance fraud, false accusation, and obstruction of justice. His daughter Jennifer was sent to mandatory rehabilitation. Mayor Keller resigned in disgrace after it was exposed that he had taken bribes from Raymond for years. Millbrook elected a new mayor, a young woman with a vision of a town where no one would be abandoned. In Chicago, William Blackwood recovered almost completely. He was no longer the mafia boss he had once been. Instead, he devoted all of his time and energy to a charity called the Second Chance Foundation, dedicated to helping homeless people across the Midwest. He often told people that he had been born a second time because of the kindness of a young woman, and he wanted to spend the rest of his life paying that kindness back to the world. Adrian changed too. He still ran the Blackwood empire, but differently. Less violence, more legitimate business. He invested in hospitals, schools, and community support centers. Frank Moretti liked to tease him that he was turning into a philanthropist, and Adrian would only smile and say nothing. Every week, Adrian came to Millbrook to see Eliza. They ate dinner together, walked through the park, talked for hours about everything under the sun. Lucy, Eliza's best friend, loved to tease her whenever she blushed at Adrian's name. You say he's like a brother, so why do you two look at each other like you want to devour each other? Lucy would giggle, and Eliza could only throw a pillow at her to shut her up. One late autumn night, Adrian came to Millbrook but didn't take Eliza to a restaurant like he always did. Instead, he covered her eyes and drove her somewhere she couldn't guess. When he removed the cloth, Eliza froze, tears spilling before she could stop them. It was the railroad bridge, the place where she had found William, the place that had once been the darkest corner of Millbrook. But now, it had been transformed, clean and bright, with warm yellow lights glowing everywhere. Wooden benches lined both sides. A roof had been built to shelter people from rain and sun. Fresh flower pots had been planted with care, and on the concrete wall that used to be cold and bare, a large sign hung with the words, William's Bridge. You did this? Eliza whispered, her voice breaking. Adrian stood beside her, his eyes gentle as he looked at her. I had it rebuilt, so no one has to live in the dark the way my father did. He gestured to the space around them. Anyone who passes through here will be guided to the shelter, helped to find work, given a chance to start over. He pointed toward a small office that had been built nearby. That's a support station. It runs 24 hours a day. Eliza cried, and for the first time in her life she cried from pure happiness. Adrian took her hand and turned her to face him. Under the warm lights, his eyes shone with the feeling he had been holding back for 6 months. Eliza, he said, low and sincere. I used to think power was everything. I used to think money could buy anything. But power didn't save my father. Money didn't find my father. Your kindness did. He lifted his hand and gently brushed a strand of hair away from her face. You taught me that real strength isn't in guns or money. It's in the heart. And my heart, he paused and drew a deep breath, belongs to you. It has for a long time. Eliza looked at him, tears filling her eyes, her lips trembling. Adrian, I don't know if I deserve it. I'm just a girl who used to live on the streets, who used to want to die, who used to think I was worth nothing. Adrian cupped her cheek, his thumb wiping away her tears. You deserve love more than anyone I've ever met. Let me prove it. Every day. For the rest of our lives." Then he bent down, and his mouth met hers in their first kiss, sweet and full of promise, beneath the lights of the bridge that had once been the darkest place in town. Not far away, William and Lucy hid behind a tree, secretly watching the scene unfold. William smiled, his eyes shining with tears. "The boy finally did what his father told him," he whispered. Lucy turned to him, curious. "What was that?" William looked at his son and the young woman holding each other under the lights, and he answered with deep satisfaction, "Become a better man." 2 years later, the ribbon cutting for the 10th shelter took place on a bright, sunny day in downtown Chicago. The building, named Eliza's Light, rose in the middle of the neighborhood like a lighthouse guiding lost souls home. Hundreds of people attended, including men and women who had once slept on sidewalks and under bridges, who had been saved by the earlier shelters, and who now had steady jobs and new lives. Martha Chen sat in the front row with tears shining in her eyes, proud beyond words. Lucy stood beside her best friend, gripping Eliza's hand as if she was afraid Eliza might float away. William Blackwood stepped onto the stage, his stance strong, his eyes lit with a vitality no one thought he could ever reclaim after everything he had endured. He stood at the microphone, looked out over the crowd, and began to speak in a deep, warm voice that carried emotion in every word. "I used to have everything: money, power, status. Then I lost everything. I lived like a wild animal under a bridge, abandoned by the world, despised, treated like trash people wanted to throw away." He paused, and his eyes found Eliza standing below. "But there was a girl with nothing but a kind heart, and she saved me. She fed me when she was hungry herself. She protected me when she couldn't even protect herself. She saw the human being inside a madman everyone wanted to discard." William smiled, the smile of a man who had found the meaning of his life. "She taught me that a real crown isn't made of gold or diamonds. It's made of kindness, of love, of the choice to see the person inside the ones the world leaves behind." The applause crashed through the room. And in that moment, Adrian stepped onto the stage and walked straight to Eliza. Eliza stared at him, startled, not understanding what was happening. Adrian dropped to one knee in front of her, in front of hundreds of people, and drew out a small box. "Eliza Monroe," he said, his voice carrying through the microphone. "You saved my father. You saved me. You taught me how to love and how to become a better man. Will you give me a lifetime to keep learning from you?" He opened the box. Inside was a ring, simple but elegant, engraved with the words, "Kindness is our crown." Eliza cried, nodded without being able to find her voice, and when Adrian slid the ring onto her finger, the whole hall erupted into applause and cheering. After the ceremony, Adrian took Eliza back to Millbrook, back to where everything had begun. They stood beneath William's Bridge, the place that had become a symbol of hope and human compassion. On the wall, a new plaque had been mounted, engraved with the words Eliza had written. "Here, one brave heart taught the world that everyone deserves to be loved. Everyone deserves a second chance. Everyone deserves to be seen. Let kindness be your crown." The story of Eliza and William reminds us that sometimes the smallest things carry the greatest power. A meal shared, a gaze without judgment, a hand reached out when someone falls. We don't have to be rich or powerful to change a life. We only need kindness. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel, hit like, and share the video so we can keep bringing you meaningful stories every day. How did this story make you feel? Have you ever met someone like Eliza in your life? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We truly want to hear what's in your heart. We wish everyone watching this video strong health, a joyful life, and peace every day. Thank you for watching. Goodbye, and see you in the next video.